Welcome back to another week of Ramban ala Parsha, ala Torah. Obviously, Matot-Masei, it's such a large Parsha, there's so many themes to talk about. We'll try to pick out, and it's a methodological point in the Ramban, that oftentimes the Ramban makes a point and it reveals something more about the story in the Torah than it does about the specific pasuk. We'll start with an example. Everybody knows that Moshe Rabbeinu sinned at Mei Meriva, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, "Lachein lo taveu et ha'am hazeh el haaretz asher." Right? You're not going to bring the people into the land. And over. And later on in Dvarim, va'et chanan al Hashem ba'it ahi leimor, and Hashem says no. But the Ramban is going to point out where Hashem said no, but maybe not completely so. In Perek Lamed Aleph says the pasuk, "Vayidaber Hashem al Mosheh leimor, Nikom nikmat b'nei Yisrael me'et ha-Midyanim achar te'asef el amecha." Right? The whole story of the war with the Midianim, which we'll talk about a little bit today because it's fascinating and the Ramban has real insights into it. But the main thing is Moshe Rabbeinu is supposed to kill the Midianim and then his life will end. Says the Ramban, Nikom nikmat b'nei Yisrael me'et ha-Midyanim achar te'asef el amecha Nigzar al Moshe Rabbeinu shelo ya'avor et Hayarden. Moshe Rabbeinu is not going to go into Eretz Yisrael proper. Aval me'ever Hayarden asa kol mitzvot Yisrael. But on the east side of the Jordan, he did all the mitzvos that he would have otherwise done if he entered. Nitzeach shnei malchei ha'amori hagidolim v'chalak et artzam benachala. Right? He defeated them. And he split up their land b'nachala, as we'll get to hopefully with Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven and Chatzi Shevet Menashe. V'hu ra'ui sheya'asa nekama b'sonei Hashem. And it's Moshe's merit. He saw the sin of Midian, he saw the plague of Benot Moav, and he gets to take revenge. Ve'ein al Yehoshua rak mitzvat haaretz. So again, the Ramban is presenting is Moshe Rabbeinu did part of what he would do in Eretz Yisrael, he just did it in Ever Hayarden. V'od, shechalak lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu kavod zeh, sheyireh v'yismach tzadik ki chazan nakam. Right, it's a beautiful pasuk in Tehillim that Moshe Rabbeinu got to experience some part of Yerushas Eretz Yisrael, some part of winning a war, some part of distributing the land to the Shvatim. Moshe got to do. It's true. It's in Ever Hayarden. It's not Eretz Yisrael proper, and it's not what Moshe had dreamed of. But it's still something. And the Ramban wants us to notice that. HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't change his mind completely. But maybe he changed his mind a little bit in that he gave Moshe the kavod of defeating Midian and of giving their land to Klal Yisrael as an inheritance. Okay, and then the last point, V'zeh tam achar te'asef el hamecha, u'Moshe chalak kavod lepinchas sheitchil b'mitzvah, va'alav legomra, va'asa'u mashuach milchama zo, ve'ein ra'ui she'elech Elazar ki hu ha'kohen hagadol. Right, the Ramban is also bothered by the fact that why did he send Pinchas? Why didn't he send Elazar? Elazar is the Kohen Gadol. No, so says the Ramban, Pinchas was the mashuach milchama for two reasons. One, he killed Cosby, so the beginning of the war is kind of his war. And second, it doesn't make sense for the Kohen Gadol to be the Mashuach Milchama. Okay, that's the first point, but it's a significant point because I think the Ramban is saying that God didn't change his mind, didn't give in to Moshe, but a little bit did, in that he let Moshe have the experience of winning a war, of dividing the land amongst the Shvatim, even if it wasn't in Eretz Yisrael proper. Okay, next. The Ramban has another detail about the war with Midian that he's a little bothered by. Say the psukim. How much do you do? So he says, Vaydeber Moshe el ha'am le'mo, Hey chaletzu me'itchem anashim la'tzava, v'yihiyu al Midian lateit nikmat Hashem b'Midian. Okay, you need an army. How much? Elef lamata lechol matot Yisrael tishlechu latzava. 1,000 from each shevet. It's pretty small. Midian is it's a superpower. We're going to go with 12,000 people, 1,000 from each shevet. It stands out. And they say, why would that be? We had hundreds of thousands of people to fight. Says the Ramban, Pasuk Vav, Vayishlach ota Mosheh elef lamateh, lo shalach sham im kol hatzava, va'af al pi shayu hamidyanim amrav v'ha'arim bitzurot gidolot ma'od. He sent such a small army, even though Midian was enormous, and they had a strong army, and they had strong, support. Vahatam ki hanichshalim bibnot Moav hayu rabim, because many men of Klal Yisrael sinned with Benot Moav, ve'einam re'uyim l'nikmat Hashem, and therefore they're not worthy of taking God's revenge. Al kein bacharu anashim tzadikim v'yiduim l'shivtehem. The Ramban is telling us two things here. One, he's answering the problem in the Psukim, but two, he's giving us an insight into the chait of Benot Moav and Midian and the whole story there. He's saying many people in Bnei Yisrael, many men sinned, and it doesn't make sense for them to be able to take revenge on Midian when they were the ones who sinned. 24,000 people died in the plague, but the insight you get from the Ramban is the sense that many more people sinned, and they were excluded from the army. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, since the war is going to be miraculous anyway, HaKadosh Baruch Hu would rather send a smaller amount and win the war that way with people who are anashim yiduim l'shiftechem, well-known people who didn't sin, rather than sending other people who may have been tainted by the sin. Okay, that's point number 2. Now, a related point, but this is also like a fascinating point in the Ramban, a related point. The soldiers after the war, we win, and we win big. We win by a shutout, meaning, and the people come to Moshe Rabbeinu anyway, and they say as follows in Perek Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Mem Tet. The people say, "Vayomru el Moshe, Avodecha naseu et rosh anshe hamilchama asher biyadenu, v'lo nifkad mimenu ish." Right? We came back from the war, and the most amazing thing happened. We just took a count. We're all here. How many people died in the war? 0. Not only that, Vanakrev et karban Hashem ish asher matzach li zahav et sadav et samid tabat agil v'chumaz, all types of jewelry we want to give to God, l'chapel nafshotenu lifnei Hashem. The people are amazed. I mean, they went to war, and presumably they were nervous. And presumably they realized that in a war, not everybody comes back. But this time, says the Pasuk, everybody came back. And they have an overwhelming sense that they want to give something to God. And says the Ramban, Pasuk Memtet, V'ta'am avodecha nasu et rosh anshe milchama asher biyadenu. We just counted everybody and we're all here, lemor. Hine Hashem asa tishua gidola al yadenu, shelo meit b'milchama echad mikol anshe hatzava asher b'yadenu. First of all, we realized 0 casualties, no one died. V'lo huka b'cherev sheyipaked min hatzava. Not only that, nobody was injured severely such that somebody needed to take their place in the army. We're completely fine. Ulefikach, and the sense you get, the emotion. Anachnu chafetzim lahakriv karban Hashem hamatzil otanu latet lefanav kofer nafshotenu asher pada mimavet umimilchama midei charev. We owe it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We feel like we should have died and we didn't die, and we have an overwhelming desire to give a kofer, to give a pidyon nefesh, to pay God back. So first of all, you get a sense that the war was much easier than you would otherwise think. No one died. Now listen to this. V'rabotenu darshu, there's a medrash, v'lo nifkad mimenu ish lidvar aveira. No, it doesn't mean that. No, it means no one sinned in the war, right? Wars are times for people to sin. Eshed yefatoar. It's not just that it happens during the war. The war, being in a war, as I understand it, having never been in a war, it brings out your worst tendencies, your animalistic tendencies. And the halacha reflects that. And halacha allows people to do certain things in a war that it wouldn't allow otherwise. certainly in terms of kashrus and things like that. So the people, the Medrash says, Lo nifkad mimenu ish, no one sinned in the war. No, Lo nifkad mimenu ish lidvar aveira. Lomar. Shahayu b'chalet biyadenu, people were together the whole time. V'lo nifkad ish me'achinu asher batzava el makom acher la'avor avera. Nobody went by himself to commit an avera. V'amar lahem Mosheh, so Moshe says to them then, Im kain karban ze lama. Why are you so desperate to bring a karban if there's nothing to ask for forgiveness for? So the answer is Amru lo lechaper al nafshotenu mehirhur halev. Now we want to get kapara for the desire to sin. Now, this could be in two contexts according to the Ramban. First, it could be, okay, we were at the war and we didn't sin, but we felt a desire to sin, and so we want to apologize to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the desire. The other possibility is it refers back to Benot Moav. We didn't sin with Benot Moav, but we had the same Yetzer Hara for beautiful Benot Moav as the other men who did sin. It happens to be that we didn't, but we feel guilty. And in a sense, we feel overwhelming gratitude that HaKadosh Baruch Hu saved our lives. Even though, the sense you get were, they were tzaddikim, but maybe not complete so, because they had the desire, and they wanted to bring a kofar, and they wanted to bring a karban to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the Ramban explains, and that's why they did it. Okay? So the war involved 0 casualties. They were overwhelmingly grateful to God for allowing them to survive the war. Maybe, according to the Medrash, in addition to that, they felt slightly guilty for hirhur avera. Okay, so they brought the karban for that purpose. But the sense you get of a miraculous war, of a small army beating a big army with no losses, this comes through in the Rambans we've seen so far. Okay, now, let's go on to, a fascinating part of the parsha. And that's the Tanai of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, and Moshe's reaction, which seems to be nothing less than a case of PTSD, post-traumatic syndrome, meaning Moshe reacts to what seems like a reasonable request almost irrationally. Let's look at the psukim. It's Perek Lamed Bet. Umikne Rav Haya Livnei Reuven Livnei Gad Atzum Ma'od Vayiru at Eretz Yazeh Eretz Gilad V'nei Makom Mekom Nikmeh. Okay. Vayavo Bnei Gad Uvnei Reuven. Vayomeru El Mosheh Ve'el Elazar Kohen Ve'el Nisiei Ha'idel Lemor. And they list the places. And they say, Vayomru Imatzanu Chen Be'einecha Yutanet Ha'aretz Azot La'avodecha La'achuzah Al Ta'avirenu Et Hayarden. Okay, it seems pretty reasonable to me. Look, we have a lot of sheep. We have a lot of livestock. We're now here in the Ever Hayarden. It's a makom mikneh. We're happy to stay here. Nothing terrible. Let us stay here. And Moshe's response, Vayoma Moshe livnei Gad v'nei Reuven, ha'achechem yavohu lamilchama v'atem teishvu po. Right? Moshe assumes the worst in their request. And it happens to be in one of the anti-draft rallies of the Haredim that happen from time to time. My son told me that he saw a sign to get people to go to the rally. It said, Ha'achechem yavo lamilchama v'atem teishvu po, which obviously is a pasuk taken out of context. You're actually supposed to go to the war, not go to the rally. But okay, that's a side point. So what does the Ramban say? Vayavo b'nei Gad uvnei Reuven. So first a technicality. Hikdim hakatuv b'nei Reuven b'pasuk harishon. Okay, the first pasuk says Umiknei Rav Haya livnei Reuven, and only that after that v'livnei Gad. So says the Ramban, the first pasuk says Reuven is first. Kemishpat, that's the law. Ki hu habechor uben hagvira. He was first. V'chein kisheyisaper hakatuv ha'maaseh hazeh. However, when the Torah tells it over, same thing. Yomar v'la Reuveni v'la Gadi natati, etc., etc. Aval b'chol ha-parsha hazo, and when you read it inside after you see this Ramban, you'll see it's true. Yakdim b'nei God, God comes first. Ki heim natnu ha'itza hazot ve'hem hayu hamedabrim tchila. So the first thing the Ramban says is, it's true, there are two Shvatim, and Chatzi Menashe will come later. You should know, Reuven gets listed first because he's the Bechor. But God is the real pusher. God had the most cattle, and more than that, God was the person who really spoke to Moshe. Vehem hayu giborim yoter mibnei Reuven. Ki Moshe nemar v'tarav zra'av kadkod. The Ramban says God were very brave, braver than Reuven, as in the bracha of Moshe Rabbeinu. Ulefikach lo hayu yireim lashevet levadam ba'aretz hazot mipnei yoshvei haaretz. God was not afraid. You have to realize, to live in Ever Hayarden means to live without the protection of the 9.5 Shvatim who live on the other side of the Yarden. And if God forbid they were attacked, there wouldn't the support wouldn't come that quickly. And so you need to be brave. So says the Ramban, but they were brave. Don't worry about that. Now, what's the response of Moshe? The angry response of Moshe. And the Ramban says as follows: V'hinei Moshe chashad otam ki yomru kein. Moshe thought, probably incorrectly, but Moshe assumed that they said it mipachad anshei haaretz Canaan. These people didn't want to fight the war. There was going to be a war, and presumably there would have been losses in the war when they came into Eretz Yisrael. Says the Ramban, Moshe assumed they were afraid. They didn't want to be part of it. She'amru bahem hameraglim lo nuchal la'alot el ha'am ki chazak hu mimenu. And when I say PTSD, I mean Moshe, says the Ramban, is replaying in his mind what happened 38.5 years ago. Remember? We were about to go into Eretz Yisrael. We're going to go into Eretz Yisrael. Okay, first let's send Meraglim. Meraglim come, changes the whole story. 38.5 years we have to spend walking around the Midbar because of that sin. And now Moshe, in this moment, feels, oh my God, it's happening again. There's another group of people who don't want to go into Eretz Yisrael and whose fear is going to poison everybody. And Moshe gets angry. And Moshe, Ki'ilu, is afraid that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to keep them in the Midbar forever. Who knows? Hine Moshe chashad otam ki amru ki mipachad anshei Eretz Canaan shamru bahem amraglim lo nuchal alot elam ki chazaku imenu v'lachein amar lahem she'enam botchim b'Hashem ka'avotam. Moshe is so angry because he sees it happening over again, and he accuses them of being frightened like their fathers. V'yasaf od lahanisham kahem lahanicham b'midbar. Moshe says to them, what are we doing in the Midbar? We're in the Midbar now because this exact same thing happened 38.5 years ago, and now you haven't learned your lessons at all, and you're terrified for no reason. V'yasaf od lahanisham kahem lahanicham b'midbar. God's going to keep us in the Midbar. V'lakach anu oto chalila shenira mehem. We're not afraid. Aval na'avor chalutzim la milchama v'nihiyeh mihirim v'rishonim lifnei ha'am lihilachem ba'oivei Hashem ki lachmeinu heim. Says B'nai God, and maybe a little bit B'nai Reuven, we're not afraid at all, Moshe. We're going to go first. We're going to lead the people. We're going to make it clear to them that there's nothing to worry about. And in fact, that happened. And maybe that's partially the explanation for, the whole T'nai Kaful, right? The whole idea that if you do this, you'll get it. If you don't, you won't. And the extension of the parsha and that whole discussion, maybe they really needed to make it so clear. Moshe needed to say to Yehoshua, as he did, I'm telling you, Yehoshua, these people only get Ever Hayarden if they lead the war into Eretz Yisrael. If they don't do it, we're not going to give them Ever Hayarden, because he's so afraid that this is Meraglim part 2. He's so afraid that he's come across people who otherwise are afraid to fight for Eretz Yisrael, and that's why they want to stay in Ever Hayarden. It turns out that wasn't the case. Not only did they say this in this week's parsha, they then did it in Sefer Yoshua, and in fact Moshe said they needed to wait till they conquered the land. That's what we refer to as Sheva Shakavshu, But they said, we'll wait till we conquer the land and till we distribute it to all of the Shvatim. That's another 7 years of Sheva Shel Chilku. Now, there's another possibility, which is the etzem choice to stay in Ever Hayarden was problematic, right? Which is possible. How are they going to get to the Beis HaMikdash? How are they going to be part of Klal Yisrael? Okay, so some of that is Moshe Rabbeinu saying, let's get half of another Shevet. Let's get Shevet Menashe. So now it's Reuven, Gad, and half of Shevet Menashe to connect them to Eretz Yisrael proper. It seems like that's not the pshat, because they calmed Moshe down by talking about the fact that they're happy to go first. It's just circumstances that they want to leave their cattle in Ever Hayarden, but they're not at all afraid of the war. There's nothing about, we want to be part of Klal Yisrael, we want to go to the Beis HaMikdash, we want to do Aliyah L'Regel. So I'm rejecting that, but it dawns on me, and maybe on the Ramban as well, that could be part of it. Although I can't play that through. I don't know how that would work exactly. Okay. Let's go on to Perek Lamed Gimel and to a pasuk which really fits into the whole philosophy of the Ramban, but it's famous, and this Ramban we have to do. In pasuk Lamed Gimel, in Perek Lamed Gimel, in pasuk Nun Gimel, the Torah says, "V'horashtem et haaretz v'shavtem ba," and you should literally, disinherit the others from the land, and you should live in it. Ki lachem natati et haaretz lareshet ota. And here, v'horashtem is kind of a funny word, but here we come to, a famous shita of the Ramban. Says the Ramban, v'horashtem et haaretz v'shavtem ba ki lachem natati et haaretz lareshet ota. Al da'ati, and I think the Ramban says al da'ati because he knows the Rambam disagrees. Zo mitzvat asehi. It's a mitzvat aseh. What is it? Yitzaveh otam sheyeshvu ba'aretz v'yirshu ota. He commanded them to inherit the land. Why? Kihu nitana lahem. What's the connection between v'horashtem et haaretz v'shavtem ba? Ki lachem natati et haaretz lareshet ota. So says the Ramban, no. When God gives you something, v'lo yimasu b'nachalat Hashem. When God gives you a gift, you don't return it, you don't reject it. V'ilu ya'alu al da'atchem lalechet v'lichbosh eretz shinar o eretz ashur v'zulatanu lityashev sham ya'avru al mitzvat Hashem. Says the Ramban, no. God commanded you in this pasuk to inherit the land. Anybody who chooses not to is being moes. Vayimasu be'eretz chemda, right? A pasuk, I think in Yeshayahu. The point is, the Ramban says this is not optional. It's a commandment. Now, the Ramban emphasizes this because he knows that the Rambam doesn't count it, right? In the Sefer HaMitzvot, the Rambam doesn't have a mitzvah of Yeshivat Eretz Yisrael. In Mitzvat Aseh Daled of the Shichachat HaAsin, the Ramban says these are the mitzvahs the Rambam forgot. He counts this as a mitzvah, right? The Ramban was one of the biggest Zionists, I think historically. The Ramban was the first Jew to be exiled to Eretz Yisrael. And that's where he lived his last years, that's where he died. The Ramban was a huge Zionist and loved living in Israel. Now, let's say as an aside, I don't think for a second that the Rambam didn't think it was a mitzvah. There's all kinds of answers. It's a mitzvah klalit. There's all kinds of answers. But here the Ramban is saying, this is a mitzvah saseh. And he continues, Umashi fligu rabotenu b'mitzvat hayeshiva be'eretz Yisrael. And that which Chazal, sort of not expanded upon, but exaggerated about living in Israel. V'she asur latzeit mimenu. V'yadunu kimoredet ha'isha she'ena rotzeh la'alot im ba'ala la'eretz Yisrael. V'chein ha'ish. Right? The Ramban says a bunch of Gemaras. A woman who won't go to Eretz Yisrael when her husband wants to make Aliyah, she doesn't get a ksuba. Similarly, a man whose wife wants to move to Eretz Yisrael and he doesn't want to move, he has to divorce her and give her a ksuba. Why? Says the Ramban, because of this mitzvah, the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Ki hakatuv hazeh hi mitzvat aseh. I think this is classic Ramban. He keeps making the same point because he already knows the opposition. V'yachzir ha-mitzvah zot b'mekomot rabim bo rushot haaretz, etc., etc. He says many, many places in the Torah where this mitzvah is emphasized. because it's an important mitzvah. As an aside, it's interesting. I don't think you need a pasuk for the mitzvah Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. I once heard from Rav Shechter. He was at a bar mitzvah, a family bar mitzvah, and he said, it was in a frum place, and all these people found out who he was, and they kind of like surrounded him, these younger men, to discuss Zionism, and he said, they talked about the Rambam and the Ramban and Machlo, and he said, I'm pretty much sure I'm quoting now, idiots, didn't you ever read Chumash? Right? The whole point of Chumash is to go into Eretz Yisrael. Rav Kook said a similar thing, although without the word idiots. But the same idea, the whole purpose of Chumash is to go into Eretz Yisrael. How could it be that that's not a mitzvah? Okay, there are technical discussions that have to be had. But says the Ramban, it's a mitzvah, and this is the pasuk v'horashtem et haaretz. When looking for the source of that mitzvah, this is the source. Okay? Last point, but a connected point. In Perek Lamed Hey. No, it's a bigger point. We'll see how quickly we can do it. In Perek Lamed Hey, the Torah introduces Ir Miklat. Right? If you kill B'shogeg, you have to go to an Ir Miklat. Now, how does it work? So when you look in Pasuk Lamed Aleph, there's two strange psukim. V'lo tikchu kofer lenefesh rotzech asher hu rasha lamut kimot yumat. Right? You can't take a ransom from a person who killed b'mezid because he has to die. V'lo tikchu kofer lanus el ir miklato, and you can't accept a ransom to allow him to return home. Lashuv lashevet ba'aretz ad mot hakohen hagadol. So I'll just say it outside because we're running out of time. The first thing the Ramban says, the first pasuk is an intentional murderer. Somebody who murdered, obviously you can't take kofer lenefesh rotzech asher hu rasha lamut kimot yumat. The second pasuk, says the Ramban, is the rotzech b'shogeg. The rotzech b'shogeg has to go to an ir miklat. So what is he asking for? After he goes to the ir miklat, he doesn't want to wait for the Kohen Gadol to die. So he says to you, listen, if you let me come out, I'll build a yeshiva, I'll build a mikveh, I'll build a shul, I'll do good things. Let me come home. So the Ramban says, Hanachon ba'katuv hazeh, ki bitchila hizhiranu min hamezid v'lo tikchu kofer. Right? Then we come around to the shogeg guy. And the Ramban makes 2 points. And we'll do this quickly. The Ramban makes 2 points. The first is, why does he go to the Ir Miklat immediately? Well, he goes to the Ir Miklat immediately because of the Goel Hadam. Right? That's part of the enforcement procedure. The Goel Hadam can kill the Horeg B'Shogeg, so he goes to an Ir Miklat. But the second thing, because he's afraid of that, but says the Ramban, as time passes, he has a trial. And in the trial, he's found not guilty because he's a Horeg B'Shogeg. He's not a Horeg B'Mezid. So at this point, everybody knows he's not a Horeg B'Mezid, and the Goel Hadam has calmed down. So if that's what happened, let him go home. He's not worried anymore. Says the Torah, no. He has to stay till the Kohen Gadol dies. Okay, why it's the Kohen Gadol, we'll leave for another time. Very last thing, because I couldn't leave it without this, but this is a story or an idea that repeats in the Ramban many, many times. V'lo tachanifu et haaretz asher ata ba, ki hadam hu yachanif et haaretz, v'la'aretz lo yichupar ladam asher shupach ba, ki im b'dam shofcho. Another reason you can't let him go is because it would be chanifa, or false flattery of the land. The Ramban in many, many places, and here especially, talks about Eretz Yisrael as if it's a person, as if it has feelings, and as if it cares deeply about the issues that involve it. Ir Miklat and Horeg B'Shogeg apply in Chutz La'aretz also. But says the Ramban, specifically in Eretz Yisrael, Lo Tachanifu et Haaretz, you cannot be Machanif the Aretz because the Aretz won't abide it. What does it mean the Aretz won't abide it? They'll kick it. Lo Taki Aretz etchem b'tamachem oto. What does that mean? It's hard to explain, and when we have more time, we'll do it. But the Ramban thinks that all the lands of the world are run by Malachim obviously at the beck and call of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but Eretz Yisrael has direct divine providence, and that divine providence won't allow certain things to happen. Okay, we did a lot today. We talked about how Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't allowed to go into Eretz Yisrael, but in a way he was, at least in Ever Hayarden. We talked about why the army was so small, because people had sinned with Benot Moav and God didn't want them involved. We talked about why the soldiers themselves were so overwhelmingly grateful when they realized that not only didn't anyone die, no one was injured, and they wanted to bring this carbon to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We talked about the Tanai of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven and what I refer to as Moshe's PTSD, when he's standing in front of them and he sees what's going on. He's terrified that this is Meraglim part 2, and they calm him down. Okay, we talked about the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, which is a big theme in the Ramban. We talked very, very quickly about how Ir Miklat works and the Goel Hadam. And finally, the fact that Eretz Yisrael is an actual caring being, and Lo Tachanif Wa Ta'aretz. You could never say that about the 5 towns or Teaneck or any place else. You could only say that about Eretz Yisrael because Eretz Yisrael is a living, breathing organism of its own. That's it for today. Shabbat Shalom to all of you. See you next week. Bye-bye.